Hi everybody, Adam Steele here, and it's show and tell today. I've made a baseboard. What's the big deal? Who cares? This is a valve-based pedal board that lights up, has all sorts of fancy features, and is not running off the AC. This is entirely running portable off batteries. And I'm going to tell you why that's important for me and how cool it is and what I've done in this video. Stay tuned. So if you like all the nerdy stuff that we do here on the channel, go ahead and subscribe, please. It really helps. Hit the like button, all that kind of stuff, because that means that more people might be able to see some of this cool stuff and learn about some of the stuff that I've done that could probably help you. So this board has been a real labor of love, and it's pretty much the most versatile baseboard that I've ever had that I can take anywhere. And also it's shiny and lights up in purple. It's got 4 pedals on it. It's powered from a Chiox 4 power supply on the back, and it all runs off batteries. Why would it run off batteries when a lot of stages have power, Adam? That sounds stupid. Well, a lot of places, they do have power, but some of them you don't want to be routing power out to the front of the stage. Maybe it's kind of a venue where there's been some light rain or something. And I'd rather keep things covered and just, not connected to anything electrical other than a ground lifted XLR coming out of it, which means that technically it's protected. Also, the bonus version, which we'll talk about later, comes with a wireless transmitter and receiver, so that it's double bonus that I'm not connected, it's not connected, no batteries, no connections to mains electricity at all. And that kind of means there's also, no risk of shock or any of that kind of thing, which some of the venues that I've played, most of them are absolutely fine, but the odd one you're looking and going, really don't want to plug anything into those sockets. I've played a lot of wedding and cover shows over the years, and quite often I'll be asked at the drop of a hat to turn up in a tent in the middle of a field while it's cloudy and kind of raining. And yes, the PA system is hooked up to AC or a generator or something, but you can see kind of rivers of water going around the outside of the tent. It's eesh. So I've given myself the option here to run entirely without any sort of AC power. Although in an emergency, if the batteries die, you can plug pretty much any 12 to 24 volt DC or AC power supply into the Chiox 4, and that will power the whole shebang, minus the LEDs. So what I'm running is a Kali 76 bass, which in my opinion is the best bass compressor on earth right now. That is running at 18 volts, which you can only really do with some of the cleverer, power supplies. Yes, you can get voltage doublers and that kind of thing, but those tend to be quite complicated, and they don't give you very much in the way of current draw, and the Kali 76 doesn't really support a lot of that. So the Chiox has an 18 volt mode, which that is in. Skipping ahead, what I went with next was the new Revolt bass from 2 Notes, which is my now go-to for bass tone because it's got a really nice clean, a really nice kind of drivey sound for those rock songs, and ultimate metal. Which, depending on the gig I'm doing, I might need 1 or 2 or all 3. And having them there, the best possible, analog tube-based preamp, is great. And that runs off one of the 12 volt switch outputs on the Chiox 4, which just about manages, because it can do 660 milliamps per socket. So this can hang. And then at the end, I've got the 2 Notes Cab M, which has got my bass amp models in that I like to use. I usually use an 8x10, but if it's a kind of a more traditional kind of settle down gig, I might pull out one of my presets with a 1x15 and go quite kind of muffled on top and, sit in the background as needed. Probably not use this bass either. And then coming back here, this is the Zoom Multi-Stomp, which is a real Swiss Army knife. I use it quite often as a tuner, honestly, but also It's got some really cool features in there, like it's got the bass detune, which is kind of like a chorus but doesn't have that wow wow kind of thing going on, which if I turn that on, you'll hear that straight away. Let's just go on a clean tone. Which is great if we want to do, if someone says, oh, can we do Sweet Child of Mine? I can go. And so on and so on. Or if we're doing anything that's like, I don't know, big Nirvana kind of. That kind of thing. That bass detune is really quite useful. And that can also do things like octaves, and anything that's weird and kind of out of the ordinary if it's called for on a gig. I can very quickly, if I know a song's coming up in the set, dial that in and leave it switched off and then kick it on at the right moment, which can be really nice for really filling out a sound. Maybe a band wants to do Sledgehammer or something, I can whack on an octave. There are other octave pedals that are better, but I don't want to be carrying around like a large board. I don't want to be carrying around a Dimension C and an octave and all this other stuff. I wanted to keep it compact. So this thing really holds its own well enough for that one time in the show that it will kind of come up and do its thing. And because it has the inbuilt tuner, it's justified its place on the board. So let's look at the back. There are 2 strips of LEDs on here, which are 5-volt LEDs, which means they can be run directly off a USB. And then there is the power bank, which feeds the Chiox 4. Now let's talk about this power bank, because this was a whole journey in and of itself. There is, the whole reason this was inspired is I got the Chiox power supply, the Chiox 4, because it has a USB power input, which was fascinating to me. I was thinking, hey, if I can run this whole thing straight off any battery bank, that would be amazing. As it turns out, my requirements were a little out of spec, shall we say. That especially the Revolt bass with its valve that needed that 12-volt, 600 milliamp plus, quite high power draw. By the time I had everything else plugged in, including the wireless kit, which is one of the Line 6 units, let's find it. This Line 6 unit, which was in the bag so that can daisy chain off the power from the Zoom, which is also 9 volts, and plug into the Kali 76. I can use that if it's a slightly bigger gig and I want to go walking, but I don't have to use this, and this can go straight back in the bag when not needed. I do have the G90 rack, but that was massively overkill and requires AC power, so I used my smaller receiver there, because if I'm doing a massive show, then I'm probably going to be using more than this board anyway. So, hey, that's a whole different thing. But what it turned out was that getting 5-volt power from a power bank through to the Chiox, it couldn't deliver enough power reliably. And we were starting to get warning signs where the power on the Chiox, there's a little light in the O on the Chiox, that was turning off. And when that turns off, that means that you are really close to your power limit. And a couple of times it turned off mid-song or mid-show, and it turned out that the current draw was just too high for USB 5 volts to deliver. And that's where we start getting into Future World, because that's where USB PD comes in. Not the USB police. USB power delivery is a whole new thing. You may not even know you have this. If you've got like an iPhone or an Android charger that's got USB-C on their end and whatever, like Lightning or USB-C on the phone end, it might come up with like a little quick charge. Or on Apple it doesn't, so you really wouldn't know. And somehow it's charging way faster than it used to. What's happening is that the whole system is smart and kind of negotiates, says, because USB is 5 volts, right? But USB PD can be 9 volts, 12 volts, or even 20 volts, depending on whether the charger can hang, depending on whether the device can actually request it and use it, and depending on whether the cable is capable of delivering it. So it's kind of complicated, but if all the devices in that chain all agree that they can do more than 5 volts, they can turn it up. And so they can deliver way more power over the same cable. Because with current comes heat. There's only so much current you can send over a given cable before it gets too hot and starts to melt. Whereas you can up the voltage, usually quite a lot more, and not generate nearly as much heat. And that's exactly what's going on here, is that I got a power bank, this middle SAF fuel one, which has a USB PD socket and can give out 12 volts. And the real missing link is there's an extra little cable that I've got in between the SAF fuel power supply and the Chiox, which has what's called a PD trigger, which means it essentially kind of lies to the power supply and says, I can do 12 volts. So what's happening is it's sending 12 volts to the 12 volt input on the Chiox 4. That means that instead of trying to cram loads of current down one cable and threatening to melt and getting to an absolute limit, it's absolutely flying through, sending all the wattage that we need down one cable without anything melting, although I have to admit it does get a little bit warm. Originally, I was powering the LEDs off the same battery bank because they really don't draw very much power compared to all the pedals. But now that the power bank is in 12 volt PD mode, it can't give any power to the LED lights at 5 volts. This battery bank can only do 1 voltage at once. So I went to the nearest supermarket, got a tiny little cheap power bank for like $12, $15, whatever it was. And that now runs the LEDs completely separately. I figured I'd spent this much time and effort on it, may as well. Another thing that's worth mentioning is the Chiox 4 doesn't quite fit underneath the board. And it's hard to tell just from looking at it, but if I disassemble this, you might notice that the Palmer pedal bay, which I've used, is slightly bigger on one side than the other. And that's because it was never designed for the Chiox 4 to go in between its rails. So what I had to do was take the feet off, take the rails apart, and kind of drill the holes a little bit wider so that it would kind of be bigger on one side. So the Chiox 4, which now has Velcro keeping it in, now fits. So under the hood, there is a lot going on this thing. But what this means is that I'm never going to get any kind of AC hum interference. Unless I'm in the emergency situation, I can run this with wireless off the same batteries. Oh, and this all comes in a nice case. Palmer sent me the pedal bay years ago, just after the first 42 Gear Street that I went to. And it got used a couple of times. Oh, there's the transmitter that goes with the Line 6 wireless, by the way. This is the TBP12. You can use the cheaper TBP6, and I've got one that I've used to death. This needs a little bit of gaffer tape to keep it together, but this is a really nice battery-powered solution. But to get extra clever, the transmitter uses rechargeable AA's, and these rechargeable AA's that I found don't even need a charger. They are like lithium-ion AA's that you can charge using a USB-C cable. And this USB little pigtail here can connect all 4 of these batteries to one USB. So I could charge all of my wireless systems batteries off my power banks when I'm not in the middle of a show. And also, because, this is real belt and braces stuff. This is me being absolutely on crazy form here. This is a 9 volt battery charger with some 9 volt batteries that are rechargeable, so that if any batteries threaten to die in the preamps inside my bass, I'm still covered without having to go out and buy disposable batteries. Because again, a lot of these shows that I used to do, and I still do the odd one, the weddings, the covers, I find that a lot of them are in the middle of a field, maybe 30 miles from anywhere. Which means if your battery and your preamp dies and you're using a bass that doesn't have, doesn't have a passive active kind of kill switch so you can go to passive mode, you're screwed. And, if you're doing a lot of shows in a row, which sometimes happens, you don't necessarily have the time to go and, you know, keep buying more disposable batteries. And I don't want to use disposable anything anyway. I'd rather use rechargeables where possible. So everything in here is completely rechargeable. And then whenever I get anywhere that has AC, or if I get home, I can recharge the whole thing overnight and I'm ready to go for the next day, next week. The power draw on this, I'm now at 58% on the Safuel power supply. As I say this, I just recorded the bass for the Trooper for Produce Like a Pro. And between that, which took an hour and a half to get everything done, and this, we're still not at 50% battery life from 100. So I could do this for a whole like 4-hour show. And for a 4-hour show, I mean, sometimes I do a 2-hour show or a 2.5-hour show with a break. And if you forget to unplug it, you don't want it dying mid-set. That should still be more than enough. And I have tested that it will go all the way down to 1% on the battery and still deliver enough power to run everything properly. So there you go. If you found this interesting, I'll try and link a few of these things down in the description below. They are affiliate links for things like the rechargeable batteries and that kind of thing. I'll link what I can, but things go out of stock, you know, things change. But use this as ideas for your stuff. If you're running a bigger board, obviously you're not going to be able to run it off a battery. But, you know, the idea is there. And so I can now do, as I did in the Revolt video, clean tones. I can do heavier tones. And I can do metal. And I've got every little feature I need. I've got my compression that levels everything out. So if I switch basses, it doesn't sound like massive level jumps. And that keeps my dynamic playing kind of in control for a show. And everything I need is right there. And as an added bonus, because of the way that it's all set up, if I decide that I want to run an amp during a show, let's say that there is backline there for me to use for monitoring on stage. Generally, I wouldn't. I'd use in-ear monitoring. But if what's needed for the show is an amp, which again sometimes happens, I can run from the output loop on the Cab M into the effects return on an amp. And that will give me, apart from the Cab emulation, which would go to front of house, everything on here ready. I'm covered. Everything that I need. If I bring 2 basses, spare strings, you know, rechargeable everything, then everything that can fail is covered. Because, oh boy, the number of times that I've been at shows and something inevitably fails. I don't like being caught out, so I'm not caught out. Hopefully this hasn't been too rambly for you. I hope you've kind of enjoyed the ride, so to speak. But there we go. This is everything that I use when I go out and tour. And here's why I can use the Revolt on a battery. Thanks everybody for watching. Like I said earlier, please, if you would hit the subscribe button, hit like, all that kind of stuff. It really does help. Tell your friends, share on Reddit, all that kind of stuff. And thank you, everybody. I'll see you all. Thanks to the patrons. Thanks to you. I'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye.